The member for Euroa.
I feel sick that we are having this debate. I don't think there has ever been a piece of legislation to come before this chamber that I have been more vehemently opposed to. I feel sick that Labor MPs are not brave enough to stand up and speak the truth about this legislation. I don't care if you think that Daniel Andrews' handling of this pandemic has been infallible. I don't care if you stand with Dan. I don't care if you think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. The truth is that this legislation is about handing the Premier and the Health Minister the ability to rule by decree. Is that power that you want to hand to every future Premier and Health Minister? Doesn't matter what you think about Daniel Andrews. This is not even about the current government. This is about the management of pandemics, but also the ability to trigger these powers forever into the future. It's about the regime that it has the potential to set up here in this state. That's what is at stake here. Is that what we want as Victorians? This bill allows the government to declare a pandemic in Victoria and make orders that lock down the state, even when there is no presence of disease here. Yes, the Chief Health Officer needs to publish his or her advice within 14 days of those orders being made. But that advice, even if it contradicts the order made by the Premier or the Health Minister, doesn't invalidate those orders if it doesn't support it. The bill gives the government the right to make orders on the ability of attributes, things like race, gender, sexuality. How on earth can people support that? How on earth can members opposite support that? It's extraordinary. It offers no rights of appeal to courts for people who are incarcerated. It sets up a penalty regime of fines that would see an individual face more than $90,000. That would send most ordinary Victorians to jail. Who can afford a $90,000 fine? And the government says, don't worry, that's just about the worst breaches. Well, that's not what the legislation says. It's extraordinary, Acting Speaker. It is extraordinary, and I cannot believe that those opposite are not brave enough to stand up and speak out about it. I imagine that the member for Altona is going to speak on this legislation. She's been the Attorney General. She has been a lawyer. She cannot possibly agree with this. She can't. Where are your values? Speaker, there is no parliamentary oversight of these powers. No parliamentary oversight. It sets up a consultative committee of people appointed by the Premier and the Health Minister, and they don't even need to take the advice of that. It's just a consultative committee. Central to a liberal democracy is a belief in shared power, and central to a liberal democracy is the belief in a suspicion of concentrated power. Central to a liberal democracy is the accountability of the executive to the parliament. Central to a liberal democracy is the preservation of the following rights: freedom to criticise the government, freedom from arbitrary arrest, freedom of worship, the right to a fair trial, the right of assembly, freedom of movement. This bill hands the government the power to throw out every one of those rights by decree, and there's no oversight of these powers. We are supposed to think critically in this place. We're supposed to come here representing our constituents, thinking critically. That's why people elected us. Stop being sheep. I find it inconceivable that a future Premier, for example, might determine that people with red hair can't hold a job. I find that completely out of the realm of possibility. But you know what? 2 years ago, I never contemplated that we would live in a world where someone who isn't vaccinated can't hold a job, can't go into a shop, can't go to an event. I never believed that we would come to a place as a state where we would see that. But here we are, and these things don't happen overnight. They happen by degrees. Do I trust the Andrews government and all future governments to exercise these powers responsibly? No, I don't. And I think anyone who does is an absolute fool. Labor MPs protest that this is what we asked for, that we called for elected politicians to be accountable for these decisions. What we called for was proper parliamentary oversight. And that's why we've proposed that the power to make orders should require the approval of a constitutional majority of both houses of the Parliament. When the President of the Victorian Bar Council comes out and says that the Stasi would be happy with the powers that this bill confers, people need to sit up and take note. This is how he summarised it yesterday. The bill confers on the Health Minister, in a practical sense, an effectively unlimited power to rule the state by decree for effectively an indefinite period, and without judicial or parliamentary oversight. That doesn't add up to good democracy. People might argue that ultimate accountability sits with the people at an election. If you don't like what a Premier's done, well, vote them out. But yesterday, when we had the bill briefing, the department could not say whether this bill gives the power to the Premier to suspend elections. What? They did not know the answer to that, and they said they would have to come back and give us advice, which we still haven't received. That remains unanswered. The department doesn't know whether the Premier could use this bill to suspend an election. Do you realise how extraordinary that is? The Irish philosopher Edmund Burke said that the people never give up their liberties but under some delusion. Those opposite tell us that unprecedented powers are required for unprecedented times. Governments always present compelling reasons to concentrate power. My grandmother came to this country fleeing Mussolini, and I am glad that she's not alive today to see what is happening. I genuinely am. I think she would be absolutely horrified. I honestly never believed that the people elected to this chamber would think that it is appropriate to hand the Premier and the Health Minister the kind of power to lock people up, to lock people down, to cancel protests without the checks and balances of Parliament, to strip people of their most basic rights without the oversight and the checks and balances of Parliament. The erosion of people's liberties does not happen overnight. It happens by degrees. Streamline pandemic laws by all means. We don't argue with that. We know that the government needs a certain degree of flexibility to control dangerous outbreaks of disease. We're not arguing about that. We're arguing for proper accountability and oversight. This bill does not deliver those measures. Let me conclude with the proverb that we all know because it is inscribed into the foyer of this building. Where there is no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counsellors there is safety. That's the principle of this Parliament, and it is the principle that I urge members of the Labor Party to adhere to. Do not give this unchecked power, not just to this government, but to future governments. It is wrong.